The smell of disinfectant still clung to Celeste Whitaker's scrubs as she hung them in the closet for the last time 3 years ago. 37 years of nursing at Denver General, and all she had to show for it was a modest pension, arthritic hands, and a son who seemed to view her visits as interruptions to his perfect suburban life. Now, at 65. Celeste sat in her small one-bedroom apartment in Aurora, staring at the fumigation notice taped to her door. 3 days. The building management needed 3 days to handle the roach problem that had been plaguing the older units. 3 days that she couldn't afford to spend in a hotel, not on her fixed income. She picked up her phone and scrolled to Marcus's contact. Her son, Dr. Marcus Whitaker, lived just 20 minutes away in a beautiful 4-bedroom house in Cherry Hills Village with his wife Victoria and their 2 children, Sophie and Tyler. Surely family could help family for 3 nights. "Mom." Marcus's voice carried that slight edge of impatience she'd grown accustomed to over the years. "Hi, sweetheart. I hope I'm not calling at a bad time." "Just between patients, what's up?" Celeste explained about the fumigation, trying to keep her tone light. "I was wondering if I could stay on your couch for 3 nights. I know it's an imposition. But, Mom, this really isn't a good time." The words came quickly, as if he'd been preparing them. "Victoria has that huge presentation for the Morrison account on Friday, and the kids have their school performances coming up. The house is just chaos right now." "I wouldn't be any trouble," Celeste said quietly. "I could help with Sophie and Tyler. Maybe cook some meals. It's not about helping, Mom. It's just, you know how you get when you're stressed, all anxious and overthinking everything? We can't handle that energy right now on top of everything else, anxious and overthinking. And that's how her son saw her when she needed help. Not as the woman who had worked double shifts to put him through medical school, who had sacrificed her own social life to drive him to every soccer practice and debate tournament. "What am I supposed to do?" "Marcus, you'll figure something out. You always do. Maybe call that church you go to. They have programs for seniors, right?" Programs for seniors. As if she were already warehoused away from real life. After hanging up, Celeste sat in the silence of her apartment, surrounded by the photos of Marcus's childhood, his graduation from medical school, his wedding to Victoria, the grandchildren she saw maybe once a month if she was lucky. Her eyes fell on the bank statement on her coffee table, and something cold settled in her stomach. Last year, Marcus had borrowed $50,000 from her retirement savings to buy Victoria a new Mercedes. "Just a short-term loan, Mom. You know I'm good for it." "No, I'm—" Yeah, but here they were, 12 months later, and every time she brought it up, there was always an excuse. The mortgage was high, the kids' private school was expensive, Victoria's business was still getting off the ground. $50,000 enough to afford any hotel in Denver for months, and he couldn't spare a couch for 3 nights. The irony wasn't lost on Celeste that Marcus chose Malone's Steakhouse for their family dinner 2 nights later, the same restaurant where she'd taken him to celebrate his acceptance into medical school, spending her entire paycheck on a meal she could barely afford. Now she sat across from Victoria Chen Whitaker, watching her daughter-in-law order the $48 ribeye without glancing at the prices. Victoria was beautiful in that effortless way that money could buy perfect highlights. Designer handbag, nails that cost more than Celeste's weekly grocery budget. "So, Celeste," Victoria said, cutting into her steak with surgical precision. "How are you handling the whole apartment situation? I heard about the roach problem." She said it like Celeste had somehow invited the infestation personally. "I'm managing," Celeste replied, watching 9-year-old Sophie push her French fries around her plate. "How's school going, sweetheart?" "Good. We're doing a project on family trees. I want to interview you about when Daddy was little." Victoria's fork paused midair. "Oh, honey, Grandma Celeste is probably too busy for all that. Maybe we can find some old photo albums instead." Too busy. Celeste's calendar was emptier than a midnight diner, and Victoria knew it. Marcus checked his Rolex, the one Celeste had given him for his residency graduation. "We should probably head out soon. Victoria has an early morning tomorrow." "Actually," Victoria said, suddenly brightening, "I just remembered I need to stop by the office tonight. Something urgent came up with the Morrison presentation." She turned to Marcus with practiced innocence. "Could you drop me off downtown? I can Uber home later." Downtown was in the opposite direction from Celeste's apartment, a 40-minute detour that Marcus accepted without question. "What about Mom?" Marcus asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Victoria reached into her purse and pulled out 2 crumpled 20s, laying them on the table next to Celeste's water glass. "This should cover an Uber home, right? Maybe a nice long ride will give you time to think about long-term solutions for your housing situation." Celeste stared at the money. $8. After Marcus had taken his share for the tip, there would be $8 left. The exact amount Victoria had calculated for the bus fare to Aurora, if the buses were still running this late. "That's very generous," Celeste said softly. She kissed Sophie and Tyler goodbye in the restaurant lobby, holding them a moment longer than usual. They smelled like childhood strawberry shampoo and playground dirt. "Are you sure you can't stay over, Grandma?" Sophie whispered. "We could have a sleepover." "Not tonight, sweetheart, but soon." "Okay." Victoria was already at the valet stand, impatient to leave. Marcus gave Celeste an awkward hug that felt more like obligation than affection. "Take care of yourself, Mom, and really think about what we discussed earlier." What they'd discussed was Victoria's suggestion that Celeste consider senior living options that offer more support and social opportunities. Translation: get out of our lives voluntarily so we don't have to feel guilty about abandoning you. Celeste stood on the curb outside Malone's, watching the Mercedes disappear into downtown traffic. East Colfax Avenue stretched before her, a maze of pawn shops, liquor stores, and sketchy motels. Not exactly the neighborhood where a 65-year-old woman should be walking alone at 9 p.m., but apparently that didn't matter to her family. The bus stop was 3 blocks away, according to a homeless man who warned her that the last eastbound bus had left an hour ago. A taxi would cost at least $25. Money she didn't have. She started walking, her sensible shoes clicking against the sidewalk with each step that took her further from the life she'd thought she belonged to. The streets grew darker, the people more desperate. A woman about her age sat outside a liquor store, holding a cardboard sign that read, "Stranded, anything helps." There, but for the grace of God, Celeste thought, and kept walking. The 7-Eleven on the corner of Colfax and Yosemite was an oasis of fluorescent light in the urban darkness. Inside, Ahmed was restocking energy drinks, his tired eyes kind behind wire-rimmed glasses. "You okay, lady? You look upset." Celeste touched her cheek, surprised to find it wet. "I'm fine. Just need to figure out how to get home." "Where's home?" "Aurora, near the hospital." Ahmed winced. "Long walk. You got money for taxi." Celeste looked at the $8 in her hand. After a candy bar and something to drink for the walk, maybe she'd have $5 left, not enough for anything useful. That's when she saw the lottery machine. She'd never been a gambling woman, never bought a scratch-off ticket or played the numbers. But standing there in that harsh fluorescent light, holding money that had been thrown at her like she was panhandling, something shifted inside her. "Does that lottery machine work?" she asked Ahmed. He nodded. "Powerball drawings tonight. Jackpot's up to 62 million. 62 million. The number was so large it felt fictional. She thought about Victoria's designer handbag, about Marcus's Rolex, about the $50,000 they owed her that had somehow become invisible. "I'll take one ticket," she heard herself say. "Quick pick." The machine hummed as it printed her ticket. $5 gone, leaving her with 3 and the longest of long shots. But as she folded that ticket and slipped it into her wallet, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Defiance. Let them call her anxious and overthinking. Let them suggest she needed long-term solutions. She'd spent her whole life taking care of other people, putting their needs before her own. Maybe it was time she took a chance on herself. 7 days. 7 days since Marcus and Victoria had abandoned her on East Colfax. And not one phone call. Not even a text to make sure she'd made it home safely. The silence spoke louder than any argument ever could. Celeste sat at her kitchen table with her morning coffee, staring at the lottery ticket she'd taped to her refrigerator. A reminder of the night her family had shown their true colors. She'd made it home eventually, after a 2-hour walk through neighborhoods that made her grateful for every streetlight. Her feet had blistered, her knees had ached, but she'd arrived at her apartment with something more valuable than the 3 remaining dollars in her pocket clarity. The winning numbers had been announced 3 nights ago. She'd almost missed them, half asleep on her couch while nursing her 3rd cup of chamomile tea. The drawing was just background noise while she tried to ignore the silence of her phone. Tonight's winning Powerball numbers are 7, 14, 21, 35, 47, and Powerball number 9. She'd checked the ticket 4 times before the reality sank in. 7, 14, 21, 35, 47, and Powerball 9. The exact numbers printed on her wrinkled $5 receipt from desperation, $62 million. The first person she'd wanted to call was Marcus, her son, her pride and joy, the doctor she'd sacrificed everything to create. But something had stopped her from reaching for the phone. Maybe it was the memory of his voice when he'd called her anxious and overthinking. Maybe it was Victoria's casual cruelty disguised as concern, or maybe it was the simple fact that they hadn't bothered to check if she'd survived the night they'd thrown her away. Instead, she'd spent the past 3 days researching. What happened to lottery winners? How did sudden wealth change family dynamics? The stories she found were cautionary tales of exploitation, manipulation, and relationships destroyed by greed. But there was something else in her research that caught her attention. The stories of winners who'd used their newfound wealth to test the people around them, to discover who loved them for themselves and who saw them as an opportunity. She picked up her phone and dialed the number she'd memorized. Chen & Associates. This is Sarah speaking. Hi, I'd like to schedule a consultation with an attorney. It's regarding a lottery win and estate planning. Congratulations. May I ask the amount involved? $62 million. A pause. I see. Let me transfer you to Sarah Chen directly. She handles our high-net-worth clients. The irony wasn't lost on Celeste that Victoria's older sister would be the one helping her plan her financial independence. Sarah Chen had always been the responsible one in the family, the one who'd become a successful attorney, while Victoria drifted from one business venture to another, each funded by Marcus's increasingly strained finances. Mrs. Whitaker Sarah Chen here. I understand you've had some good fortune recently. You could say that. I'd like to keep this confidential for now, if possible. I have some family dynamics I need to navigate carefully. I completely understand. In fact, I'd recommend keeping this quiet until you've had time to make informed decisions. Money has a way of changing how people see you, often not for the better. That's exactly what I'm afraid of. They scheduled a meeting for the following morning. As Celeste hung up, her phone buzzed with a text message. Victoria's name appeared on the screen, and her stomach clenched automatically. Stop being so dramatic. Celeste, it was just a ride. You're acting like we committed some crime. Marcus feels bad about the other night. Maybe we can do dinner this weekend if you promise not to make everything so heavy. Just a ride. She thought abandoning her mother-in-law in a dangerous neighborhood was just a ride. And now she was graciously offering to let Celeste back into their lives if she promised to pretend it never happened. Celeste stared at that message for a long time, her coffee growing cold in her hands. A week ago, she would have jumped at the chance to reconcile. She would have swallowed her hurt and shown up with a smile, grateful for whatever scraps of affection they threw her way. But that was before she knew what she now knew. She typed back a simple response. "I'm busy this weekend." Victoria's reply came immediately. "Busy with what? You never do anything." The casual cruelty of it took her breath away. You never do anything. As if her life was so empty, so meaningless, that the idea of her being busy was laughable. Celeste turned off her phone and went to get dressed. She had things to do. Important things. The chest pains started 2 weeks after the lottery win, sharp and sudden enough to make Celeste drop her coffee mug. It shattered on the kitchen floor, spreading ceramic shards and dark liquid across the linoleum she'd been meaning to replace for years. As she knelt to clean up the mess, another pain shot through her chest. This one was real, the stress of keeping such an enormous secret, the sleepless nights spent planning her new life, the weight of knowing exactly what kind of people her family had become. Her body was finally protesting. But as she sat in the emergency room 3 hours later, watching nurses bustle past with practiced efficiency, an idea began to form. A terrible, necessary idea. She needed to know exactly where she stood with her family. Not just their casual cruelty when she was inconvenient, but how they'd react when she truly needed them, when she was vulnerable and scared and couldn't give them anything in return. Dr. Martinez, a young woman who reminded Celeste of herself 30 years ago, was reassuringly thorough. "Your heart is fine, but your blood pressure is elevated. Have you been under any unusual stress lately?" Unusual stress. If she only knew. "I want you to take it easy for the next few weeks." Dr. Martinez continued. "Reduce stress where possible. Do you have family who can help out?" That was the question. Wasn't it Celeste called Marcus from the hospital parking lot? Her hands still shaking slightly from the afternoon's events. "Mom!" He sounded distracted. "Probably at the clinic." "I'm at Denver General. I had chest pains this morning." The silence stretched long enough that she wondered if the call had dropped. "Are you okay?" he asked finally, but his tone was more annoyed than concerned, like she'd interrupted something important. "The doctor says it's stress-related, but they want me to take it easy for a while. I was wondering if I could stay with you and Victoria for a few days, just until—" "Mom, this really isn't a good time." The words came fast, rehearsed. "Victoria's got that presentation next week, and the kids have state testing coming up. The house is just chaos right now." "I wouldn't be any trouble. I could help with Sophie and Tyler, maybe." "No, it's not about helping. It's just, you know how you get when you're stressed, all anxious and needy. We can't handle that right now on top of everything else." Anxious and needy. That's how her son saw her when she was scared and in pain. Not as a mother who'd sacrificed everything for him, but as an inconvenience. "What if I need help? What if something happens?" "You'll be fine. You're tougher than you think. You always figure things out." She was tough when they needed her to be, when it meant they didn't have to worry about her. But when she needed them to be strong for her, suddenly she was anxious and needy. "I have to go. Mom, patient in 5 minutes." The line went dead, leaving her sitting in her car with the taste of betrayal bitter in her mouth. That evening, she called again. This time, Victoria answered. "Oh, Celeste, Marcus told me about your little episode today." Her voice dripped with false sympathy. "You know, my mother had the same thing a few years ago. Stress-related chest pains. The doctor told her it was mostly psychological." Mostly psychological. As if her fear and pain were figments of an overactive imagination. "The thing is," Victoria continued, "you really need to learn to manage your anxiety better. Have you considered seeing a therapist? There are some very affordable options for seniors." Affordable options for seniors. She was already being categorized, filed away in a box marked elderly problems to be managed. "I was hoping I could stay with you for just a few days, just until I feel steadier." "Oh, Honey, I wish we could help, but our guest room is Marcus's office now. And honestly, with your health issues, wouldn't you be more comfortable somewhere with proper medical support? Proper medical support. She was talking about nursing homes, care facilities, places where inconvenient elderly parents got stored away. What kind of support? Well, there's that nice assisted living place on South Monaco, Sunset Manor. Very reasonable rates. And they have nurses on staff. Activities for residents. You might actually enjoy it more than being cooped up with all our chaos. The suggestion hit her like a physical blow. Victoria wasn't just refusing to help her through a health crisis. She was using it as an opportunity to suggest permanent removal from their lives. I see. It's really for the best, Victoria continued, warming to her theme. You wouldn't have to worry about grocery shopping or cleaning or any of that daily stuff, and we could visit whenever our schedules allow. Whenever their schedules allowed, which, based on the past few weeks, would be never. I should let you go, Celeste said. Feel better, Celeste, and really think about what I said. Sometimes a change of scenery is exactly what we need. After she hung up, Celeste sat in her quiet apartment and felt something die inside her. Not hope that had died weeks ago on a street corner with 8 crumpled dollars. What died was the last vestige of belief that blood meant anything to these people. They weren't just refusing to help her in a moment of genuine need. They were actively trying to get rid of her permanently. Victoria had practically been shopping for nursing homes while she was still explaining her symptoms. The private investigator came recommended by Sarah Chen, though she'd raised an eyebrow when Celeste had requested the service. Are you sure about this, Mrs. Whitaker? Sometimes it's better not to know. But Celeste was sure. If she was going to make decisions that would affect the rest of her life, she needed all the facts, not just the surface-level cruelty she'd been experiencing, but the full picture of who Marcus and Victoria really were. James Morrison was a retired detective, gray-haired and methodical, with the kind of patience that came from 30 years of uncovering uncomfortable truths. He'd presented his findings in a manila folder, the contents of which had taken Celeste's breath away. Marcus and Victoria weren't just financially irresponsible, they were drowning. Credit card debt, $87,000 across 6 different cards. A second mortgage on their house, $93,000 taken out to fund Victoria's failed interior design business. Car loans, personal loans, medical bills from cosmetic procedures Victoria had insisted were business investments. Total debt, $180,000. And that was on top of the $50,000 they still owed Celeste. They're barely making minimum payments, Morrison had explained. Dr. Whitaker's income is good, but their lifestyle expenditures are completely unsustainable. Based on their spending patterns, they'll be bankrupt within 18 months unless something drastic changes. The spending patterns were what made Celeste's stomach turn. Victoria's monthly beauty treatments, $1 and $200. Designer handbags and shoes, $800 average per month. Marcus's golf club membership, $2,500 annually. Private school for the children, $40,000 to $1,000 per year. Meanwhile, they were telling Celeste that money was tight, that they couldn't afford to help her, that she needed to consider affordable senior housing options. But the most damning evidence was in their recent browser history and email accounts. Morrison had been thorough, if ethically questionable in his methods. Victoria had spent hours researching Sunset Manor, not just the basic information, but detailed financial analysis of what it would cost, what Medicare would cover, how long the waiting list was. She'd even printed out application forms and financial aid paperwork. More disturbing were the emails between Marcus and Victoria from 6 months ago, before Celeste's fumigation crisis. "We need to do something about your mother," Victoria had written. "She's getting needier every year, and the kids are starting to notice how sad she always is. It's affecting their mood." Marcus's response, "What do you suggest?" She's not that old, and she's healthy. She won't be healthy forever. And honestly, Marcus, we can't keep lending her money every time she has an emergency. We have our own financial goals. Lending her money. They were rewriting history, pretending that her help to them had somehow been reversed. The email chain continued over several weeks, with Victoria researching senior living facilities and Marcus gradually coming around to the idea that his mother was becoming a burden they needed to address proactively. They'd been planning to warehouse her for months. The fumigation incident had just provided the perfect opportunity to begin their campaign. Celeste closed the folder and sat in Sarah Chen's office, feeling strangely calm. "What are you thinking?" Sarah asked gently. "I'm thinking they've made their position very clear. Now I need to make mine equally clear." The dinner invitation came exactly 3 weeks after the lottery drawing, delivered with Victoria's typical blend of false warmth and underlying manipulation. "We're having a little family gathering Sunday evening," Victoria said when she called. "Nothing fancy, just us and the kids. Marcus thought it would be nice to have you over." Marcus thought, not we thought, or I thought. Marcus thought, which meant this was probably his guilty conscience finally getting to him after weeks of treating her like a diseased relative. "What's the occasion?" "Oh, just family time. We realized it's been a while since we all got together properly." It had been exactly 26 days since they'd abandoned her on East Colfax. 26 days since Victoria had suggested she move into assisted living because she was having chest pains. But apparently they were all supposed to pretend those things had never happened. "Should I bring anything?" "Actually, if you could make that potato salad Sophie likes, that would be great. And maybe pick up some dinner rolls from Romano's bakery, the good ones, not the grocery store ones." Even their invitation came with a shopping list and specific requirements. She was welcome at their table as long as she paid for the privilege and brought her own contributions. Sunday evening. Celeste stood on their front porch holding a covered dish of potato salad and a bag of expensive dinner rolls, listening to the sounds of laughter from inside. Through the window, she could see Sophie and Tyler running around the living room, while Marcus and Victoria sat comfortably on their leather sectional, glasses of wine in hand. The scene looked perfect, warm and welcoming, exactly like the family dinners she'd dreamed of having with them for years. She should have known it was too good to be true. Victoria answered the door wearing a flowing silk blouse that probably cost more than Celeste's monthly grocery budget, her smile bright and artificial. "Celeste, so glad you could make it. Come in, come in." The house smelled like roast beef and garlic, expensive candles burning on every surface. Everything was perfectly arranged, from the fresh flowers on the dining table to the throw pillows artfully scattered on the couch. It was the kind of home Celeste had dreamed of having when Marcus was young, back when she was working double shifts and eating ramen noodles so he could have new school clothes. "Grandma," Sophie ran over and hugged her legs. At least the children still seemed genuinely happy to see her. "Hi, sweetheart. How's school going?" "Good, I got an A on my science project about volcanoes. Want to see it?" Before Celeste could answer, Victoria swept in. "Why don't you help Grandma put her food away? Honey dinner's almost ready." In the kitchen, Celeste arranged her potato salad and dinner rolls alongside the spread Victoria had prepared. Everything looked expensive and professionally done, from the perfectly browned roast to the elaborate side dishes arranged in matching serving bowls. "This all looks wonderful," Celeste said, meaning it. "Thanks. I've been cooking all day," Victoria said, with the air of someone who'd just completed a marathon, though Celeste noticed price stickers still on some of the containers. Dinner started pleasantly enough. The children chattered about school and friends. Marcus talked about a promotion he was hoping for, and Victoria shared gossip about their neighbors. For a few minutes, Celeste let herself relax into the illusion that this was what she'd always wanted: a normal family dinner where she belonged. That illusion shattered about halfway through the meal. "So, Mom," Marcus said, cutting into his roast beef with surgical precision, "Victoria and I have been talking, and we think it might be time for you to consider some lifestyle changes." The way he said it, so carefully neutral, made her stomach clench. "What kind of changes?" Victoria leaned forward, her expression earnest and concerned in that particular way that meant she was about to say something devastating while pretending it was for Celeste's own good. "We're worried about you living alone, especially after those health scares. What if something serious happens and there's no one there to help?" "I have neighbors," Celeste said carefully, "and I can always call 911. "But that's not really a long-term solution, is it?" Marcus chimed in. "I mean, you're 65 now. These things are only going to get worse." These things, her age, her health, her very existence had become these things' problems to be managed rather than natural parts of life. "What are you suggesting?" Victoria brightened as if she'd been waiting for this opening. "There's this wonderful place called Sunset Manor. It's an assisted living community. Very well regarded. They have activities, medical staff on site, meal plans. It would take so much stress off your shoulders. And off ours," Marcus added with brutal honesty. "We worry about you all the time. Mom, whether you're eating right, taking your medications, staying safe, it would be such a relief to know you were somewhere with professional care." Professional care? They were talking about shipping her off to an institution so they wouldn't have to feel guilty about ignoring her anymore. "Have you looked into this place?" Celeste asked. "Oh, yes," Victoria said eagerly. "I drove by last week. Very nice grounds, friendly staff, and it's not too expensive within your Social Security budget if you're careful about spending." Within her Social Security budget. They'd calculated exactly how much her warehousing would cost and determined it was affordable. "The best part," Victoria continued, "is that it's only 20 minutes away. We could visit regularly." "How regularly?" Marcus and Victoria exchanged a glance. "Well, you know, with our schedules, probably monthly, maybe more during holidays." Monthly visits. After a lifetime of raising Marcus, of being there for every scraped knee and broken heart, of sacrificing her own dreams so he could achieve his, they were offering her monthly visits. "What about Sophie and Tyler?" Celeste asked. "When would I see them?" Another glance between them, this one longer and more uncomfortable. "The thing is," Victoria said slowly, "we think it might be better if their visits were supervised. You know how you get sometimes when you're stressed or upset. We don't want the kids to see you that way." Supervised visits. They were talking about her like she was a danger to her own grandchildren. "How do I get—" Celeste asked quietly. "Oh, you know." Victoria waved her hand vaguely. "Emotional. The kids don't understand why Grandma's always worried. Always worried. Because she'd been mourning the loss of her family while they'd been planning to dispose of her. I think this is really the best solution for everyone," Marcus said, his tone final. "You get professional care and social activities, we get peace of mind, and the kids get to see you when you're at your best." Celeste looked around the table at these people who were supposed to love her. Her son, who was calmly discussing shipping her away like she was a problem to be solved, her daughter-in-law, who was practically glowing with excitement at the prospect of getting rid of her permanently, her grandchildren, too young to understand what was happening, but old enough to absorb the message that Grandma was someone to be managed and contained. "I need to think about it," she said. "Of course," Victoria said brightly. "Take your time. Though I should mention they have a waiting list, so if you're interested, we should probably put your name down soon." They'd already researched waiting lists. They'd been planning this for weeks, maybe months, and tonight was just the formal presentation of their decision. But what they didn't know was that Celeste had been planning too. Celeste excused herself to use the bathroom. needing a moment away from their eager faces and carefully reasoned arguments for why she should disappear from their lives. In the mirror, she looked at her reflection, the careful makeup she'd applied, the nice dress she'd chosen to look presentable for them, the hopeful expression she'd worn walking into this house. She looked like exactly what she was, a lonely old woman, desperately trying to earn love from people who saw her as a burden. But she wasn't just a lonely old woman anymore. She was a lonely old woman with $62 million and absolutely nothing left to lose. When she returned to the dining room, they were all looking at her expectantly, like they thought she might have come to her senses in the bathroom and decided to thank them for solving the problem of her existence. "I've made my decision," she said, sitting back down at the table. "Oh, wonderful." Victoria clapped her hands together. "I think you're going to love it there. Should I call tomorrow and get you on the list?" "No," Celeste said quietly. "I don't think I'll be needing assisted living after all." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut glass. "What do you mean?" Victoria asked, her smile becoming strained. "Celeste, we've explained why this is the best option for everyone." Celeste reached into her purse and pulled out a manila folder. "Before we discuss my living arrangements, I think there are some things you should know about your own financial situation." She opened the folder and pulled out the private investigator's report. "Did you know that you currently owe $180,000 in various forms of debt, credit cards, second mortgage, personal loans?" Marcus's face went pale. Did you know that based on your current spending patterns, you'll be bankrupt within 18 months? Victoria grabbed the papers, her eyes scanning the numbers. "This is invasion of privacy. You had no right. I had every right to understand the financial stability of the people who are making decisions about my care," Celeste said calmly. "Especially when those same people owe me $50,000 they borrowed last year." She pulled out another document. "This is a detailed accounting of every dollar I've spent supporting this family over the past 15 years, every mortgage payment I helped with, every vacation I funded, every time I bought school clothes or covered your emergencies." Marcus's hands were shaking as he took the paper. "Mom, it says you owe me $127,000, not including the recent $50,000. With interest calculated at current market rates, that's $216,000 total." "We were going to pay you back," Victoria said desperately. "When things stabilize, Celeste asked, "when you stop spending $1,200 a month on beauty treatments, when Marcus gives up his golf club membership, when you stop sending the children to private school, you can't afford—" She pulled out printouts of their credit card statements, their browser histories, their email conversations about her future. "You've been planning to warehouse me for months," she continued, her voice steady despite the pain in her chest. "This dinner, this family intervention, it's all been a setup to get me to voluntarily remove myself from your lives so you won't have to feel guilty about abandoning me." Sophie started crying, sensing the tension even if she didn't understand the words. Tyler moved closer to his sister, confusion written all over his 7-year-old face. "You're twisting everything," Victoria said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Am I? Because here's an email from you, Victoria, from 6 months ago." Celeste read directly from the printout. "We need to do something about Marcus's mother. She's getting needier every year, and the kids are starting to notice how sad she always is. It's affecting their mood." Victoria's face flushed red. "That was taken out of context. And Marcus's response," Celeste continued. "What do you suggest? She's not that old, and she's healthy. And your reply, she won't be healthy forever. And honestly, Marcus, we can't keep lending her money every time she has an emergency." She looked up from the paper. "Lending me money. You've rewritten history so completely that you actually believe I'm the one who's been taking from you." Marcus ran his hands through his hair. a gesture she remembered from his childhood when he'd been caught in a lie. "Mom, that's not... We weren't..." "You weren't what?" "You weren't planning to manipulate me into thinking I was a burden. You weren't researching nursing homes while telling me it was for my own good." She pulled out another set of documents. Sunset Manor application forms, printed from Victoria's computer 3 weeks ago, financial aid paperwork, even a tour appointment scheduled for next Tuesday, which I assume you were planning to spring on me after I agreed to your suggestion tonight. The room was so quiet, Celeste could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. "I've spent the past month documenting our interactions," she continued. "Every phone call where you told me I was being dramatic. Every text message where you suggested I needed professional help. Every conversation about my future that didn't include me in the decision-making process." She opened her purse again and pulled out a legal document. "This is a copy of my new will, drafted by Sarah Chen, your sister. Victoria. Small world, isn't it?" Victoria's mouth fell open. "Sarah. You went to Sarah. I needed someone I could trust, someone who understands family dynamics and financial manipulation." Celeste smiled grimly. "She was very helpful, especially when I explained how you'd been treating me. The will is interesting," Celeste continued. "But first, there's something else you should know about that night you abandoned me on East Colfax." She reached into her purse one final time and pulled out a photocopy of her lottery ticket. "This is what I bought with the $8 you threw at me. Well, 5 of those dollars. Anyway," Marcus squinted at the paper. "Mom, what is this supposed to prove?" "So you bought a lottery ticket. So what?" "Check the winning numbers from 3 weeks ago," Celeste suggested. "They're on your phone." She watched as Marcus pulled out his iPhone, his fingers moving across the screen. She saw the exact moment he found the winning numbers, saw his face go pale as he compared them to the paper in his hands. "This is..." he started, then stopped, looking up at her with something she'd never seen in his eyes before. Fear. $62 million, Celeste finished for him. "The jackpot you heard about on the news 3 weeks ago, that was me." Victoria snatched the paper from Marcus's hands, her eyes darting between the numbers on the page and the phone screen. For the first time since Celeste had known her, Victoria looked genuinely shaken. "You won the lottery," she whispered. "I did. Though after taxes and taking the lump sum, it's actually about $37 million. Still quite substantial. Wouldn't you say?" The children had gone completely quiet, sensing the shift in the room's atmosphere. Sophie was looking back and forth between the adults, trying to understand why everyone suddenly looked so serious. "Why didn't you tell us?" Marcus's voice cracked slightly. Celeste leaned back in her chair, studying the faces around the table. "I wanted to see how you'd treat me when you thought I had nothing to offer you." The truth of that statement hung in the air like smoke. "Mom, that's not..." "We weren't..." Marcus started, but couldn't seem to finish the sentence. You weren't trying to get rid of me. You weren't calculating the cost of shipping me off to an institution. You weren't planning to limit my access to my own grandchildren." She pulled out her phone and showed them a recording app. "I've been documenting everything, every conversation where you called me anxious and needy, every suggestion that I needed professional care, every email where you discussed how to handle the Celeste problem." Victoria found her voice, though it was higher and more strained than usual. "That's not fair. Celeste, you're twisting everything. We love you." "Do you?" Celeste asked. "Because I've been trying to figure out what love looks like in this family, and I'm having trouble identifying it." She opened the folder again and pulled out printed copies of text messages. "Here's you, Victoria, telling me to stop being dramatic about being abandoned on a street corner. Here's you suggesting I should learn to manage my anxiety better when I was having chest pains." Her voice remained steady, but her hands were trembling slightly. "And here's you researching nursing homes and calculating costs while I was explaining my symptoms." Victoria's perfect composure was cracking. "I was trying to help." "Help whom?" "Because it wasn't me." Celeste turned to Marcus. "And you. When I called from the hospital, you were annoyed that I'd interrupted your day. When I asked if I could stay with you during my recovery, you called me anxious and needy." "Mom, please," Marcus said, and for a moment he sounded like the little boy who used to crawl into her bed during thunderstorms. "We can fix this. We can do better. Can you? Because I've been giving you chances to do better for weeks now, and every single time, you've chosen to see me as a burden rather than your mother." Celeste picked up the legal document from the table. "This brings us to my new estate planning. Originally, I was planning to leave everything to Marcus and create trust funds for Sophie and Tyler's education." She paused, watching their faces. "But then I started thinking about what you said tonight, about how I need professional care, how I'm too emotional for my own grandchildren to be around unsupervised." "We didn't mean," Marcus started. "You meant every word." Celeste cut him off. "And I believe you. So I've made arrangements that reflect your honest assessment of my character and capabilities." She opened the document. "Sophie and Tyler will receive modest trust funds for education enough for college, but not enough to make them targets or spoil them. They'll gain access when they turn 25, old enough to make wise decisions." Victoria made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a sob. "The rest," Celeste continued, "goes to various charities that support elderly people who've been abandoned by their families. There's also a scholarship fund for single mothers pursuing nursing degrees, and an endowment for a community center that provides social services for isolated seniors." She pulled out another document. "This is a detailed accounting of every dollar I've spent supporting this family over the years. 27 years of financial support, documented and calculated with interest at current market rates." Marcus's hands were shaking as he took the paper. "Mom, this says we owe you over $200,000. "That's correct. I'm not asking for it back. Consider it my final gift to you. But I wanted you to see exactly how much your needy, anxious mother contributed to the life you're so eager to protect from her influence." The room fell silent except for Victoria's quiet crying and the children's confused whispers. "There's one more thing," Celeste said, reaching into her purse. "A no-contact order, drawn up by Sarah and ready to be filed if necessary. If you harass me, threaten me, or use Sophie and Tyler to manipulate me, there will be legal consequences." She stood up, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "I'm not doing this to hurt you. I'm doing this because you've made it very clear that you don't want me in your lives unless I'm useful to you. And I'm tired of being useful to people who don't love me." "We do love you," Marcus said desperately. "Mom, we do. We made mistakes." "You made choices," Celeste corrected. "Over and over again. You chose to see me as a problem to be managed rather than a person to be cherished." She gathered her purse and folder. "I want you to know that I don't hate you, either of you, but I also don't trust you, and I can't build a relationship with people who only value me when I have something they want." "Where are you going?" Victoria asked, panic creeping into her voice. "Home, to my apartment. The one you think is too dangerous for me to live in alone." Celeste walked toward the door. "Don't worry about visiting me at Sunset Manor. I won't be there." "Mom, wait." Marcus stood up so quickly his chair fell over. "Please, we can talk about this. We can work it out." Celeste looked at him for a long moment, this man she'd raised, sacrificed for, loved unconditionally for 37 years. "Can we? Because I've been trying to work it out for months. And every conversation ends with you telling me what's wrong with me and how I need to change to fit into your life." "That's not what we meant." "It's exactly what you meant. And you know what, you're right. I do need to change. I need to stop begging for love from people who've already decided I'm not worth it. She walked toward the door, listening to their footsteps following her. In the foyer, surrounded by family photos that had somehow always managed to exclude her, she turned back one final time. "The money changes everything for me," she said. "But it doesn't change anything about who you are. Tonight, you showed me exactly what kind of people you've become. And I believe you." She opened the front door and stepped out into the cool evening air. Behind her, she could hear Victoria's voice, high and desperate. "Celeste, please, we can start over. We can be better. But some bridges, once burned, were never meant to be rebuilt." The phone calls started before Celeste even reached her apartment. 47 missed calls by midnight, her voicemail box filled with increasingly desperate messages from Marcus and Victoria. "Mom, please call me back. We need to talk about this. You can't just... Please. Celeste, you're being completely unreasonable. We were trying to help you. Call me back immediately. Grandma, it's Sophie. Mommy is crying, and I don't understand what happened. Are you mad at us?" That last message, Sophie's confused 7-year-old voice, nearly broke her resolve. But Celeste had learned the difference between guilt and manipulation, and she wasn't going to let them use her grandchildren as weapons against her. She turned off her phone and went to bed, sleeping more peacefully than she had in months. The next morning brought Victoria to her door, pounding with enough force to wake the neighbors. Celeste watched through the peephole as her daughter-in-law alternated between rage and tears, demanding to be let in. "I know you're in there, Celeste. We need to talk. You can't just destroy our family over a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. Even now, Victoria couldn't acknowledge what they'd actually done. By noon, Marcus had arrived with Sophie and Tyler in tow, clearly hoping the children would guilt Celeste into opening her door. She watched through the window as he lifted Sophie up to ring the doorbell repeatedly, while Tyler stood beside them looking confused and frightened. "Grandma," Sophie called through the door. "Daddy says you're mad at us. Did we do something wrong?" The emotional manipulation was breathtaking in its cruelty, using confused children as shields while refusing to take responsibility for their own actions. Celeste called Sarah Chen. "They're using my grandchildren to try to force contact," she explained. "Can we expedite that no-contact order? Already drafted and ready to file. Give me 2 hours." By Wednesday, a process server had delivered the cease and desist order. By Thursday, Marcus and Victoria had hired their own attorney, threatening to challenge Celeste's mental competency and claim undue influence in her estate planning. "Let them try," Sarah said during their phone call. "We have recordings of them discussing your nursing home placement, documented evidence of financial exploitation, and witness statements from your neighbors about their neglect. If they want to go to court, we'll be ready." The harassment stopped after that, but the silence that followed was almost worse. No more calls, no more door pounding, no more guilt trips involving the children. Just the complete absence of the people who had claimed to love her. Celeste found the house in Estes Park through a realtor who specialized in privacy and discretion. 20 acres of Colorado wilderness. A modest 3-bedroom home with wraparound porches and mountain views that took her breath away every morning. "It's not fancy," the realtor warned. "Previous owner was an artist who valued solitude over luxury." "Perfect," Celeste said, writing a check for the full asking price in cash. Moving was easier than she'd expected. 30 years of accumulated possessions fit into a single moving truck, leaving room for the new furniture she bought, pieces chosen because she loved them, not because they matched some predetermined aesthetic or impressed visitors she'd never wanted anyway. Her new neighbors were a revelation. Margaret Thompson, 73 and sharp as a tack, lived on the adjacent property with her 3 rescue dogs and an organic garden that supplied half the county with vegetables. She'd knocked on Celeste's door the second day with a casserole and an invitation to join the local book club. "We meet every Thursday at the library," Margaret explained. "Retired teachers, mostly, with a few former nurses and one ex-banker who keeps us honest about financial themes in literature. Very opinionated group." "I might enjoy that," Celeste said, realizing she meant it. Within a month, she had a social calendar fuller than it had ever been. Book club on Thursdays, volunteer work at the domestic violence shelter on Tuesdays, art classes at the community center on weekends. She was learning to paint something she'd always wanted to try but never had time for when her life revolved around other people's needs. The money helped, obviously. She could afford the best art supplies, could donate generously to causes she cared about, could travel when she wanted to see new places. But the real difference was the absence of people who made her feel guilty for existing. "You're glowing," Margaret observed one Thursday evening as they walked back from book club. "I've never seen someone change so much in such a short time. I feel like I'm finally living my own life instead of auditioning for someone else's approval." Celeste admitted. 2 years passed before Sophie found her. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, hand-delivered by a nervous teenager who explained that his older sister worked at the post office and had helped track down Celeste's address. "Dear Grandma Celeste," it began in careful 11-year-old handwriting. "I hope you're not still mad at us. Mom and Dad got divorced last year, and everything is different now. Mom says you moved away because we were mean to you. I don't remember being mean, but I'm sorry if I was." Celeste sat on her porch, reading the letter, her coffee growing cold as Sophie's words transported her back to the little girl who used to help her bake cookies and ask endless questions about everything. "Dad lost his job at the hospital because of something about your money and how he treated you. The newspaper wrote about it, and the hospital said it wasn't good for their reputation. He lives in an apartment now, and Mom moved back with Grandpa and Grandma Chen." Victoria living with her parents, who had undoubtedly heard every detail about how she'd treated Celeste. The irony was perfect. "Tyler doesn't want to write to you because Mom told him you abandoned us. But I think she's wrong. I think maybe we abandoned you, and you just got tired of it. I remember how sad you always looked when you had to leave our house." Smart girl. Smarter than her parents had ever given her credit for. "I miss baking with you and hearing stories about when Dad was little. If you ever want to see me again, I would like that. But if you don't, I understand. I love you even if I can't see you anymore." Celeste called Sarah Chen that afternoon. "I want to set up supervised visits with Sophie, if she's interested, through a family counselor. Neutral territory. And I want to establish a more substantial trust fund for her education, something that will give her real choices when she's older. What about Tyler? If he changes his mind, the offer will be there, but I won't force it." The first visit was awkward. 2 years of separation creating a gulf that couldn't be crossed in a single afternoon. But Sophie was resilient, and by the third visit, they were baking chocolate chip cookies and talking about books Sophie was reading. "Are you happy now, Grandma?" Sophie asked during their 4th visit, flour streaking her cheek as she rolled out sugar cookie dough. "Yes, sweetheart, I am. Good. Mom cries sometimes and says she misses the old days, but I told her the old days weren't very nice for you." "What did she say to that? She got mad and said I was too young to understand, but I think grown-ups sometimes forget that kids notice everything." Out of the mouths of babes. Epilogue. What Money Can't Buy. 5 years after the dinner that changed everything. Celeste Whitaker stood in the garden of her mountain home, watching the sunrise paint the peaks in shades of gold and pink. At 70, she was healthier and more vibrant than she'd been in decades. Her days filled with purpose and genuine relationships. Sophie was 15 now, a frequent visitor during school holidays and summers. They'd developed the close relationship Celeste had always dreamed of having with her granddaughter, one built on mutual respect rather than obligation. Tyler had chosen to maintain his distance, influenced by Victoria's bitterness. But Celeste had learned to accept that some relationships couldn't be forced. Marcus wrote occasionally, stilted letters that asked for forgiveness without acknowledging what he needed to be forgiven for. He'd lost his position at the hospital when the story of his treatment of his lottery-winning mother had become public, and the medical community closing ranks against someone who could abandon a parent in need. The irony wasn't lost on Celeste that his career had been built on caring for other people's parents with more compassion than he'd shown his own. Victoria had remarried a wealthy businessman who could fund her lifestyle without requiring emotional manipulation. According to Sophie, the new marriage was already showing strains. Victoria's patterns of entitlement and exploitation apparently unchanging. But Celeste's real legacy wasn't in the wreckage of her family's consequences. It was in the community center that served over 300 isolated seniors, providing meals, transportation, and social connections for people whose families had written them off. It was in the scholarship fund that had sent 47 single mothers to nursing school, creating a pipeline of healthcare workers who understood what it meant to struggle. It was in the domestic violence shelter where she volunteered, helping women find the courage to leave relationships that diminished them. Most importantly, it was in the example she'd set for Sophie that love without respect wasn't love at all, that family was chosen as much as inherited, and that it was never too late to choose yourself. The lottery gave me financial freedom, she'd written in the memoir that had become a bestseller, with all profits donated to charity. But walking away from people who couldn't see my worth, that gave me something priceless. It gave me my life back. Margaret appeared on the path between their houses, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the satisfied smile of someone who'd successfully meddled in her friend's love life. "Robert's coming for dinner again tonight," she asked, settling into the chair beside Celeste's. "He is. And before you ask, yes, I'm happy. Yes, he treats me well. And no, I'm not going to marry him just because you think I should. A woman of 70 doesn't have time to waste on casual dating," Margaret protested. "A woman of 70 has earned the right to do exactly what makes her happy, without worrying about other people's expectations." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun climb higher over the mountains. Celeste's phone buzzed with a text from Sophie. "Can't wait for our camping trip next weekend. I've been practicing with the new telescope you sent." Another message followed immediately. P.S. "Dad asked me to tell you he's sorry again. I told him sorry doesn't fix everything, but it's a start." Celeste smiled and put her phone away. Some apologies came too late to matter, but some relationships were worth rebuilding from scratch. The difference was knowing which was which. "Any regrets?" Margaret asked, following her own train of thought. Celeste considered the question seriously. "I regret that it was necessary. I regret that my son chose pride over love, that my grandchildren grew up with questions about why Grandma left. I regret that it took me 65 years to learn that self-respect isn't selfish." "But do you regret leaving?" Celeste looked out over her garden, at the life she'd built with her own hands and heart, at the sunset painting the sky in impossible colors, at the peace that had settled into her bones over these past years. "No," she said finally, "I don't regret choosing myself." As evening fell over the Colorado mountains, Celeste Whitaker raised her teacup in a quiet toast to the woman she'd become, to the choices that had brought her here, to the life she'd finally learned to claim as her own. Some stories don't end with reconciliation. Some end with liberation. And sometimes that's the most beautiful ending of all.